As the world waits for the impact of the Omicron coronavirus variant against current vaccines, countries where vaccines are prevalent are losing patience with those who haven't gotten the jab. Germany, in the midst of a big COVID surge, has just announced it is banning unvaccinated people from all but the most essential businesses. They'll also face contact restrictions in private settings. In South Africa, where Omicron is fast becoming the dominant variant, the premier of the country's most populous province is urging people to get vaccinated immediately amid what he called a situation of great concern. And in the coming hours, US President Joe Biden will lay out his plans for those reluctant to get the shots ahead of a possible winter surge. Well, our reporters bring you the very latest from Europe, from Africa and from Asia. Fred Pleitkin connecting us today from Berlin. David McKenzie is in Johannesburg. Ivan Watson is in Hong Kong. And Fred, I do want to start with you this evening. Lay out what we know.
Well, Becky, I think one of the things that you've just said is exactly what the German government feels, and Angela Merkel and her designated successor said as well. They are losing patience with people who so far have refused or have not gotten vaccinated yet. And so therefore, the lockdown measures that were announced today, those tougher restrictions, they essentially count only for unvaccinated people. And one of the things that's being sort of talked about here in German media and in German society is that this is essentially a lockdown for the unvaccinated. Now, unvaccinated are essentially being locked out of all businesses except for the most essential ones, like, for instance, supermarkets and pharmacies as well. But you're also, for instance, talking about recreational indoor sports facilities, indoor clubs, and things of that nature as well. Also, on top of that, the Germans are saying that above a certain infection rate, things like discos and bars will also be shut down in the areas where those high infection rates exist. The German government is saying, this is Angela Merkel and her designated successor, we of course have a new incoming government here in the next couple of days. They are saying they want more people to get vaccinated. Also put forward a really ambitious plan as well, because one of the ways that they want to come to terms with this latest massive wave of infections is more vaccinations and more booster shots. And they say they want to administer up to 30 million shots, that's both boosters and first vaccinations, before the end of the year. And finally, Becky, and this is really something very important and certainly a big change in tone among German politicians, both Angela Merkel and her successor were saying that they are open and in favor of mandatory vaccinations. Now, of course, a touchy subject here in this country. They say they want the German government to draft a law. They want the ethics committee of the German parliament to then talk about it and give recommendations. And there could be a vote and mandatory vaccinations here in this country come February. So we're certainly seeing a big change in tone here in this country, and certainly a big, I wouldn't call it a crackdown, but certainly a lockdown, if you will, for unvaccinated people, Becky.
And let's remind ourselves, Germany already going through a very severe wave of COVID before this Omicron variant appeared, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's one of the things that we've seen as well. It's not only a wave of massive coronavirus infections. In fact, I just checked the numbers for today. It's 73,000 new infections in the span of 24 hours, which is a little bit less than the same day of the past week, but certainly well above anything that you would have seen, for instance, at the same time of last year, where we were already going through a big wave of infections here in Germany. And one of the things that is really concerning for the authorities here, and certainly for the healthcare sector here, is that ICUs really are filling up as well. In fact, at the beginning of this week, I was in one ICU outside of Berlin. They only had one vacant ICU bed left, and the ICUs certainly are filling up, and there is a concern, despite the fact that this country has a very robust healthcare sector, that it could be overwhelmed if the trend continues, especially in the hardest hit areas here in this country. There are already military medical evacuations going on from certain places to make sure that there's still ICU capacities, Becky.
Fred Pleitkin is in Berlin for you. David, let's get to you. Government's taking precautionary measures around the world, some of them pretty controversial. Meantime, do we know any more about just how deadly and or transmissible the Omicron variant is?
Becky, these are complicated issues, but there is some sense at this point that it might be more transmissible. That's at least what experts are saying. I mean, if you look at the average percentage of the population that is infected with COVID-19 here in South Africa, you can see that very sharp rise in mid-November up until now, where we are sitting on approaching very high levels of cases, positive cases a day, particularly here in this province, in Gauteng, in the center of the country. Now, where it goes from here, it's unclear. There was an important briefing from top scientists at the World Health Organization. Now, one big question is whether Omicron can reinfect people already who have had COVID with a previous variant. Here is the sense from this microbiologist.
After the first positive test, we monitor these reinfections for the Beta and for the Delta wave, and we didn't see an increase in reinfections over and above what we expect when the force of infection changes, when the wave stops. However, we are seeing an increase for Omicron.
And now that means that the troubling news is that there could be some level of increased reinfection, Becky, but the good news is that it doesn't appear that those are serious cases, as you might expect with this kind of virus. Also, most of the people in hospital, and the numbers are rising, but not too rapidly, are the unvaccinated. And as Fred was saying in Central Europe, it's the same message here in South Africa, where there are plenty of vaccines and even lower vaccination numbers, that people need to get vaccinated, because you can see already these tentative signs that it's the unvaccinated population, younger people, even preteens and children, who are getting this relatively seriously, and those who are vaccinated, at least at this point, appear to have some level of protection against Omicron.
David's in Johannesburg for you. Ivan, let's get to you. What are the biggest concerns in the Asia region?
Well, you can still probably count the number of confirmed Omicron cases here in Asia. It's less than 24 right now, but it is spreading. For instance, India just announced that there have been 2 confirmed cases in the southern state of Karnataka, and they're doing contact tracing of secondary and tertiary contacts in that case. In those cases, there are 2 males who traveled into the region. Their itineraries have not been announced. A lot of countries here in the region have already severely restricted travel from a number of southern African countries. We've seen some kind of waffling coming out as governments struggle to deal with the new challenge. Japan, for example, after just 24 hours after its government requested international airlines to suspend all international flight reservations to Japan, the Prime Minister reversed that decision, saying that the Japanese citizens do need to be allowed to come back into Japan. That's one example of how some governments are trying to deal with this. South Korea, which has also detected at least 5 Omicron cases, it has also, separate from that, continues to break records for new daily infections for the second day in a row, also suffering 47 deaths due to COVID-19 on Wednesday. Here in Hong Kong, which also detected some 4 cases from travelers coming in and has a very strict quarantine regime, it has just added a number of countries to its high-risk list of countries where people will not be allowed to fly into Hong Kong if they've been there in the last 21 days. And they include Finland, Ghana, South Korea, Norway, and Saudi Arabia. Governments in this region facing this new challenge and taking it very seriously.